Hi everyone, thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is Wilde Brosnan and I work here in the school attendance team in the department. This is actually our final good practice webinar before Easter. We've got a few more scheduled after Easter, including a primary school and a couple of alternative provision settings. But today we're hearing from Wayne Askham from the Abbey School. The Abbey School is a special school which is based in Rotherham. Wayne will be taking some questions at the end, so please submit those using the tab on the right hand side of the screen. And please post any questions as we go along, so we can pick out the most pertinent ones at the end to put to Wayne. We're continuing to upload all of these webinars onto the DFE YouTube channel, and that includes a webinar from the St Giles Special School actually 2 weeks ago, so please have a look at that and any of the others if you're interested in those. You should be able to find the links again on the right hand side of your screen. We'll obviously be sharing the slides from this presentation after we've concluded, so you'll get a copy of those to look through at your leisure. And also please remember to submit any feedback for us to let us know what you thought of this and what else we ought to be covering in future sessions. There are two quick additional things that I also wanted to mention. One, you'll have seen the SEND and AP green paper which came out earlier in the week and the associated consultation, and I'm sure many of the people on this call will be interested in responding to that consultation, so would encourage you to do so. And I also wanted to just very quickly also flag the school's white paper again. I'm sure everyone will have seen that, but that sets out in some more detail some of the reforms to the school attendance system as a whole that we're looking to make over the kind of coming weeks and months and indeed years. So the section on attendance is only short, but would encourage you to look through that and see where we're headed. I think that is everything from me for now, so I'll pass over now to Wayne to kick us off talking about what they do at Abbey School. Thanks, Wayne.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I think firstly, just thank you for inviting us to sort of share some of the approaches to attendance that we use. I think just like with everybody, there's no magic wand at all. This is just about, for us, our children enjoying coming to school. But one of the things I want to really look at is the culture that we've built for attendance and some of the ideas that if you can use them, magpie them. So I'll just give you a little bit of context around myself. So I'm head of school at Abbey in Rotherham. I have been here 8 years, and we'll talk about our journey that we've been on as a school as well. My background's actually initially in secondary education, so it was interesting moving from secondary into special to look at the approaches generally in teaching that changed. So if we move on to the next slide, please. I'll talk a little bit about our trust. So our trust is Nexus MAP. It was founded in 2016. The mission for the trust is together to be the best we can be. It's a nice small trust currently. We've got 12 schools, 11 special, 1 primary. It continues to grow as a trust, and we have been supporting other schools within our region. We joined the school, as I said, in 2016, and that was after we moved from special measures to good. So I'll talk a little bit about that as we move through. But in terms of our trust, one of the nice things for us is we've been allowed to keep our identities as schools. And I think that's really important, particularly in special, for parents to have that choice as well, so that they have got those different options. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So I'll give you a little bit about our context. So yes, we're a specialist setting primarily for children with moderate learning difficulties. It's a 5 to 19 through school, but we do have 3 sites. So the sites that we have, the main site here in Rotherham, we have a post 16 in Rotherham Town Centre, and we also have a hub attached to a secondary school in Barnsley. So we serve 5 different authorities. In terms of this, our journey as a school, we took over as a leadership team in April 2014. By October 2014, it had gone in special measures, and rightly so. As a school, it needed to. We moved from special measures in 13 months, and that sounds lovely, but I want to talk to you about that story, about that journey that we've been on. We joined Nexus Mat as a supported school, and in 2019 we received an outstanding judgment from Ofsted. We are one of the biggest school settings, especially settings in South Yorkshire, and for me it's really important to say that we were outstanding in April 2019. I hope for today, that was for 2 days. For today, I hope that one of the things that you get from this presentation is we want the school to be a great school for kids. And if you could steal any ideas, please do. So our pupil premium is 68%. In terms of the deprivation index, again, it's one of the most deprived in the country. We have a lot of looked after children and previous looked after children and children who are looked after within the family within school. That makes up 20% of our population. So with that comes a few challenges, and I'll go through those now. So can we move to the next slide, please? And I think any specialist setting has the same challenges. So for us, our children are transported into school, so we don't have that family contact that you would in a primary school at the school gate, particularly even in a secondary where parents sometimes, you know, they do come with the children, drop the children off. We work across 5 different local authorities. That in itself does prove a challenge, and all the areas that we serve are high in the deprivation index. I think the common theme throughout the pandemic was families approached it with real uncertainty, particularly in a specialist setting, because when it was announced that children with EHCPs were classed as vulnerable and needed places in schools, lots of our families, we met lots of resistance from our families saying, well, they've got an EHCP for a reason, particularly medical need, and we're really nervous about sending their children back to school at a time of uncertainty. So I hope that through this presentation, what we'll be able to show you is the ethos. There's no magic wand, as we all know, but the ethos that we use. So if we move to the next slide, please. One of the things that within Rotherham, and they're recognised nationally for it, is the Parents' Charter. And there are lots of charters that are set up in different authorities and different cities. We adopted their sort of ethos and built them into schoolhouses. So those look at welcome and care, working in co-production, how we communicate with our families and how we value and include them. You know, it's particularly around attendance. Lots of our families, and I'm sure lots of families in your settings, lots of our families, we don't know their experience of school. So often bringing families into school can evoke lots of memories. In a specialist setting, what we do find is a large majority of our families do have additional needs themselves. So it's how we use these 4 approaches really: the welcoming care, the working in co-production, how we communicate with families and how we value and include them. And hopefully I will be able to talk to you about how we do that with examples, particularly for the ethos around attendance. So I'll start with the curriculum. So if I can move to the next slide, please. From the very start of children coming into school, well-being is at the heart of everything that we do. And hopefully when you get sent these slides as well, you'll be able to zoom in on these areas. If a child's well-being's not right, they're not going to access learning. So for us, it's about really understanding the child's EHCP, looking at any interventions they may have had, looking at any interventions the family have had, particularly from other settings or particularly from other agencies. So for us, it's trying to get to know our families from the onset. And again, because children are transported in, often, you know, it's a big thing for a parent to put their child on a bus and let them go to school without really having that communication. So for us, the heart of that element is the well-being side of it. So looking at the well-being curriculum, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that sort of well-being curriculum and where that starts. We will move to the next slide, please. Within school, our approach is to have a dedicated behaviour and safety team. So, and that's, excuse me, on the left-hand side where we've got the deputy safeguarding lead in that. So we have a well-being lead, the deputy safeguarding lead, a mental health champion, ELSA trained TAs, and these are also trained in a range of interventions, and they're also trained in how the attendance is collected, reported, and the actions that help there. The non-teaching, so actually it means that we can be proactive rather than reactive as well. That then feeds into our class teams and our class team meetings. Any interventions that come through or any messages through whole school briefings, how we've communicated with families, and I'll talk to you about that as we move for the attendance procedure. How that looks in terms of pupil progress meetings. So a member of that team attends the pupil progress meetings to look particularly if there's any other intelligence that can be added. Also around the interventions, I know in previous webinars people have said what we'd really like to look at are some of the interventions that people have used, so I'm hopefully going to be able to show you those, some of those as well. The idea with this is that it's constantly moving and it's being proactive, but it also means that with the interventions, when they get referred for intervention, which I'll talk about later, they get picked up and monitored really quickly. So if I talk to you a little bit about our attendance procedure and what happens on a daily basis, which will mirror a lot of yours, I'm sure. So if we can move to the next slide, please. One of the things that we do, where I start with sort of the telephone areas, because we all get those how attendance is reported very differently. Some parents ring in, email, leave voicemails, text messages. It's collected at sort of the main reception and passed on to the behaviour and wellbeing team, who then collate that along with the registers and record the data. The one thing that we had to really look at in terms of how we recorded attendance and monitored any patterns instantly, particularly with COVID, because COVID made it really difficult to look at actually how many people are off with COVID. We broke that down into different sections. So looking at who had tested positive for COVID, who the household symptoms, who had close contact, if anybody had returned from holiday as a result of that, but also any other absence. What that allowed us to do was then and analyse that and look at the actions that we probably do. So for us during COVID, it was really difficult to look at the schools that we'd run. So we ran 3 different schools during COVID, which was the physical school on site, the online, but also an outreach service. And that outreach service was sort of driven by those actions that we took. So for us on a day-to-day basis, the actions are, do we need to go and collect that child? Does the family need certain support? So it may be that they can't afford to get their child into school for various other reasons. Do we need to go and have eyes on that child? Do they need help with transport? Or do we need to look at an agency referral? So it was really trying to make it, for us, it's keep it simple, take it to them. It's trying not to overcomplicate the process. So excuse me, the top and bottom for me is that children come to school because they enjoy coming to school and we want to be a great school for kids, but ultimately it's around how we continue to sort of develop that culture within school. So the next thing that I want to talk to you about, if we move to the next slide, is within school we use a restorative approach. I'm really proud to say that, you know, there's been no exclusions in school since 2014 as a result of how we've used this. But that's not to say it's not hard work, but it's working with the families and the family support all the time, even with the kids. So just really thinking about looking at how that is high support to get our families engaged, because lots of them, again, like I've said, have got additional needs. It also means that we move between those quadrants. You know, there are times, of course, we do when we have to be that authoritarian figure. But I think for us, that shared language between staff and the way that we approach to the width to come up with solutions is so important. So I want to talk to you about what that looks like in practice. So if you move to the next slide, please. So it's to really think about how we delivered this to families was around, okay, who's going to be, and we can do that being a small setting. So we've got 205 students, but we've got a high staff ratio. So making sure that families have a consistent point of contact firstly. So we developed the school's yellow pages. That's available on our website. So if something you think, oh, that sounds like a good idea, that means on the yellow pages, direct contacts to class teachers, to SLT members, but I think more importantly, the process for families to follow. So who's their first point of contact? Where does that then move on to? We also have class pages on the website that share key information, particularly for around the timetables for children, the topics that children are covering, the staff members there, and each class has a Twitter page. So that Twitter page allows a learning journey to be shared. And I think for me, that's about the engagement of how we bring children into school. It's almost like they want to be here because they can see it happening. We share key dates newsletters. The one thing that COVID's made, as I'm sure all of us do, is really look at the technology in which we use to communicate with families. So obviously SMS, Twitter, phone calls, but we really looked at how we got other families involved. So we have a key group of families that become a bit like a marigold committee, who welcome and support other families that may be struggling that we match up with. We have a family champion within school, and that's a TA that has additional responsibility. It also means that they can set up and run certain events and things to be coordinated, but really look at our least engaged families, because those are the families that are the most worrying. So with that and the intelligence that we collect, we look at the signposting services that we do. The MAT offer a really good after school offer in holidays as well, so we can direct our least engaged families to that as well. One of the things that really took off for us and that we've continued to do were live events for parents. So we have a cook with us, a read with us, a create with us, live session, a bit like this, but for our most least engaged families, we send home the ingredients or the resources that would be needed. And there's also curriculum opportunities for families to attend in school. It's also another way of saying, if a child's off or we're finding them hard to engage, we'd like to pair you up with this family at this event and help them. It may be that they go and pick them up. It may be that we go and pick them up. In terms of the home visits that we do, it's making sure that we're still developing those family links, and I'm sure that through COVID it's taught us all a lot around just how much do we know our families. So it was continuing with that, and some of the things that we've done throughout that and continue to do, sometimes supporting families with appointments who are struggling. So the next thing for us and the biggest thing was, how are we going to get our families that have been hit by furlough to engage, but also try and help them and support them get back into work and raise their aspirations for the children. So we have a volunteer scheme where the families come into our school and we'll write a reference for them as part of that volunteer scheme. We'll also hold workshops and develop qualifications and training. But for us, it's about, in payment for it, we do have a food bank on site, so that allows us to pay that for that volunteer with the food bank service. So it takes away, I think, that sort of shame that's associated with using a food bank as well. Next slide, please. To continue to build a safeguarding and attendance culture, it's how we've trained our staff to really be fully aware of how that attendance procedure works, how it links to safeguarding, and we do that through bring and brag sessions in school. So what that allows us to do is every week on a Wednesday, it's a 15-minute session where we can share best practice, a bit like a real short version of this. So it allows us to give key information. And those key lines and levels of communication, for me as well, it's the record keeping and intelligence. It's about ensuring that our staff know how to record keep, how to work with that intelligence, and really give that laser focus and triangulation of information. Next slide, please. I think lots of us are what about our most vulnerable, and I think it's about sort of sharing sort of practice. So we work with other schools, and we sort of look to, right, this is a really good idea, how can we use it in our setting but change it for our setting's needs. So we have Project 10, and there are 10% most vulnerable families. They're reviewed each week, but they get a dedicated member of the wellbeing team linked to them to do the family phone calls, to get the children in, to ring and support the family and celebrate the success. Because often when you've got low attendance, it's a bit like that some children in a specialist setting will never get 100% attendance due to medical needs as well, but it's about celebrating that and celebrating the improvements in attendance. So they have that dedicated member of the wellbeing team. We reward our pupils for being in school, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we do that as we move through this presentation. Any child below 90% attendance gets an attendance champion. So that is somebody from either their class team or the wellbeing team, depending on that workload, that has that weekly contact home, that gets text messages sent home. And we have something called a Steam Street payment. And I think it's quite unique to our school, but it gave us a real focus on how do we develop that attendance culture for our pupils. So we have a street in the middle of our school, and that's changed the specialist areas. So the IT room, the gym, the printer, photocopy room, etc. They've been changed into the IT rooms, a radio station and newsroom. And that's sponsored by local businesses. So local businesses, there's a gym, there's a printers, there's a laundrette, there's a shop, there's the library we've changed into Steam Books. So it's called Steam Books because we allow smaller businesses to come in and use that space for meetings. The children have lion leadership roles in school that I'll talk to you a little bit about. And they all apply for jobs on Steam Street. And that's real. It's a real element to say to children, you need to be in school in order to get a job. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that now. So if we can go to the next slide, please. We have 4 houses in school, and they represent our values. And that is about having a great attitude, a good heart, showing respect, and making sure that they're resilient as well. So for us, it's looking through all those elements of how does that work to get a culture of attendance to make children want to come into school. So they have house points. The house points are monetary value. So for every house point, it's a penny. So what normally happens with those is on Steam Street, there's a shop that's run by students. There's also a bank that collects the points. So the children have different roles there. What normally happens is if they choose to spend the points, they spend. If they choose to save the points, what that does is there's interest applied. So that applies monetary value and teaches children about financial viability. The whole thing is about developing aspirations for children, aspirations for families, because often when lots of our families do have low aspirations. So trying to link that with what I was talking about before with CV writing, Steam Street is a working street. It's linked to businesses, and we ask businesses to make pledges. So what happens is each area is sponsored by a business. So for example, we currently have Asda that's looking at the sponsorship there, so they've lent us their uniform, and they offered work experience for some of our students as well. So that means that it's turning role play to real play, and that's part of the after school clubs that we provide within school as well, and also part of the lunchtime clubs. In terms of the incentives and around attendance, it's all around school that there's attendance at every door. It's celebrated and communicated, and I think it's making it really high on the agenda, but making school a real fun place. And genuinely, our children do have those leadership roles, those lion leadership roles, and those Steam Street roles. So they have to apply for a role on Steam Street, and that taken into account is their attendance. And we've got an admin person linked to that role that they have to go and ask those for a day off. So if they're going to a sporting event, they've got to go and ask for the day off, etc. So if we just go to the next slide, please, I'll just give you some examples of how we use them. So the houses have mascots linked to them. So each house, like I've said before, it means that throughout school each week when there's a house event, there's a different mascot. Because it's all put on Twitter and because it's for the children, often people are looking at that and it's about wanting children to be in school. So for us, it's about building that attendance culture. So these are our mascots. So we've got Courage Lion, Raccoon Respect, Ali Attitude and Zebra Heart. The middle one is our school mascot, which is Rory the Reading Lion. But because it makes it fun and it's one of those types of things, it brings that into it. Can we move to the next slide, please? So this is Steam Street, that's changing all the time. So on there you've got the Central Bank of Abbey that we were lucky enough to get NatWest involved. You can see the radio station, and at that point it was Shabby Chic Boutique. It is changing currently, but it gives you an idea of how the children can apply for points and they work behind there. It's also there were clothes in there as well for children. What we've found with lots of our children is they save points for gifts to take home, but it's an incentive to save and to be in school to get those points. So go to the next slide, please. Part of our recovery curriculum, and I think for us, my biggest thing was recovery made us sound like the children had done something wrong. So we changed it up a little bit to say actually how we're building learning power. But for us, we've continued to develop that recovery curriculum and really focus on what the things our children missed out on during COVID, which was, you know, community inclusion, being part of their community, going out and doing Duke of Edinburgh, being part of school trips, looking at the arts. So for us, we've got a real element of arts and music and performing arts. The careers on Steam Street, lots of our children sort of missed out on, but we're a youth sport trust lead school, which brings with that lots of opportunities for our children to be out and part of what we class as reverse inclusion in that sense. Even our after school clubs, we invite mainstream schools, the local mainstream partner school into, and that's the same with the youth sport trust. So it builds those links in the community. Next slide, please. Tiers of intervention. We have the 3 tiers that I'm sure you're all aware of, but with quality first teaching. So for us, it's how those interventions are developed in class, few pupil progress meetings. We have pupil premium plans, if it's dedicated through a PEP or our personal, emotional and social data. And we try that within class first, quality first teaching. If it moves to tier 2, that's the behaviour and safety team. There's a referral process to that. It's time limited and there's an exit plan. And I will talk to you a little bit about that shortly. And then tier 3 is where we're directed by other agencies. And it may be, again, directed back down to tier 2. So if we go to the next slide, please, I could talk to you a little bit about the interventions. So on the left are a sense of the interventions that we do. So sensory circuits, therapy, bereavement counselling, bookending, which is grabbing the kids at the start and the end of the day. We're lucky enough to have on site a music therapist currently and an art therapist a day a week. Children are trained in sort of mindfulness strategies, excuse me. So for each intervention, what we do is we write the reason for the intervention, and we've got a referral process that we ask the teacher for their input, we ask the family for their input, but more importantly, once we've got that and we start an intervention, we sit down with the children and say why they've been referred, what we hope to get out of that and how long that's going to be for them. On a weekly basis, as part of the behaviour and safety team, a member of SLT RAG rates where we're at with interventions to say, actually, are they working? Do they need to continue? What does it look like at the end of that intervention? So there's a clear exit plan. After the initially 6 weeks for each intervention, it's so what? So where does that go? Because actually we could carry on doing the same intervention and not have impact. So the exit plan will either be a handover to class team, so that becomes a regular way of working for that child. It may be that that intervention's being successful at that particular point, or it may mean that it still needs to continue. But we do that in order to ensure that those interventions are having impact. And I think often we look at interventions and we don't share them with children or why they're doing them. And similarly, they could go on forever and still not have impact. So for us, it's making sure that they are obviously reviewed weekly. That's been a sort of whistle-stop tour of from me about how we've developed a culture for attendance using some strategies. I do hope that you've got something from that. So if we can move to my next slide, please. Just thank you so much for listening to me go on. But if there are any questions, I'll hand over, Will, to yourself.
Perfect. Thank you, Wayne. That's really helpful and a really good insight, I think, into the culture of the school and how you've built the culture of the school, which I think is really key for improving attendance. I've got quite a specific question to begin with from Rachel, who's asked about your approach to parents requesting term time holidays and whether you make kind of exceptions for pupils, for example, with autism, who find it more challenging to go on holiday at busy times of year.
We don't make exception for it, but what we do is we do work with families. I do recognise why often that needs to happen and be the case, but as a school it would be unauthorised. That's not to say that we are not working with the family to try and come up with some other solution. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you, Wayne. I've got a question actually here about COVID and the impact of COVID and COVID anxiety and what you have done as a school to reassure parents and pupils and make sure that they are regularly attending over the last kind of 18 months or so.
Absolutely. I think like with anybody at the start of the pandemic, it was tough because nobody knew where it was going or how it was going to last. So for us, we did a number of things. We made sure that there was regular communication, so sort of regular letters. We developed a learning platform ourselves that staff could upload to and families could be part of. That included lots of things around sensory and anxiety and working with families to get them back into school. So we'd go and do home visits. We'd make sure we talk to them about what specifically their anxieties were, and then slowly got children back into school. And I think, and I'm sure, if you are in a specialist setting, for any family to put their children onto a bus and just wave goodbye and hope that everything's going to be all right. So we also did a virtual tour of the school and what that would look like and how it had changed to reassure families. Again, for us, it was communication, home visits, virtual tour, bringing them in so they had a real idea of what school looked like during COVID and after as well. So those communications still continued.
Excellent, thank you. There's a question here about Project 10 approach and support from your local authority and what support you get from your local authority and more generally how you work with them.
Yeah, thank you very much. We work with the local authority. Our Project 10 children are probably early help, what we class as early help. So it's working in conjunction with early help. I think it's always tough having another layer attached to a family, but it's working with them and sharing the information. So the support that Project 10 are normally early help students. 9 times out of 10, we've had to do that referral. We don't have the EWO service is connected to early help for us, so it's working with those. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you, Wayne. There is a question here, well, maybe I'll group two together, and I'll give you the first part, which is how do you work with parents who don't engage, who ignore calls and visits? Do you have a kind of specific approach to working with parents where it's challenging to establish a relationship? And if I could ask a kind of second question, do you do home visits where where staff will go and collect children, and I don't know in your setting whether COVID has affected if you've had kind of staff absent in that context, but how that has worked in the COVID context too.
I think for us, it's been, we are badgered families in that sense. We've turned up at the door, we have helped their children into school where they've not been engaged, and we still continue to have, you know, those families that have got low engagement with school. So it's inviting them to the online events, it's ensuring that the, you know, if we do want them in school, we'll try and collect them, we'll go to the home to go and collect them, to bring them in, we link them up with another parent. For us, we've got a really great set of sort of our parents group, but we can link another family up, because often bringing another professional to go to the door, but if we say and bring them up over a coffee morning, for example, that we've done to engage, it has worked. We've still got those families that are sort of engaging, and in terms of we'll continue to just be insistent, consistent and persistent, like I'm sure you all are. So for us, the home visits, yes, well, we did and we have and still do go and collect children. If they've turned around and said, oh, they've overlaid and they're saying they can't get them in, then we'll be at the door and we'll be collecting them. We've been, for some of our lower attenders, actually in the house for when they got up at the breakfast table, which has been highly embarrassing, not only for family but for that child as well. So for us, it's about working with a family and again using humour, I think, with our families as well. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. That's excellent. I've got a few more questions in here. There's one which is somebody asking, would you be willing to share your attendance policy? Would that be possible to distribute amongst the people that have joined this presentation?
I've no doubt we should be fine to do that. Absolutely. I think it's the for us, it's around making sure that if it's practice that's shared, obviously I'm sure we will be able to. I will clarify that though.
Okay, thank you. And there's another question here about, and we didn't get into the kind of specific cohort of pupils, but about pupils with complex health conditions, and if there's any kind of specific work that you do with families and pupils in that context to make sure that attendance is remains high.
Yeah, so one of the things that, because our setting is primarily MLD, not many of our children have got complex health needs. However, that's not to say that we've not worked with one. We invested in something called an AI robot. I don't know if anybody's heard of that, but the AI robot takes the place of the child in school, and the child controls it from their mobile phone and interacts. So what the AI robot does is allows children to be in school and communicating and interacting, and when a question's asked, the robot's head lights up. They can move the robot around and speak to their peers with that. So that's one of the ways that we've done that, because we had a couple of students that were ill and but could still access education, and that's how we'd sort of done that around that. I hope that helps.
Excellent, thank you. I will just take one or two more questions. And there's one here which is a follow-up to the local authority work. You said earlier that you were a restorative school, a school that took a restorative approach, hadn't had any exclusions in recent kind of history. But there's a question here about whether or not you use penalty notices, or if you work with the local authority in that context. Do you use sanctions as a kind of last resort in an attendance
the
context?
Sanctions are, thank you, the sanctions are a last resort, but what we do is with our attendance policy, when children drop between, you know, and it's a consistent, it's about bringing families in, and we look at how we can support them. That includes even going to houses to have that meeting in. Penalty notices for us are a last resort. That's not to say that we don't use them. However, it's about before then what that looks like. So the initial meeting is with the assistant head for attendance, and then if it needs to move up, that comes to myself, and it's about how we work with the family and other agencies. But I'd not say never, but it's very rare that we have done, because we've worked really hard, and it is tough. There's no quick fix, but that's sort of with us, is that insistent, consistent, persistent approach does seem to be working, touch wood.
Excellent. I will put to you one last question, if that's
Yeah,
okay, Wayne.
that's fine.
Which is from somebody who's asking you to say a little bit more about the certificates that you give out for attendance and the kind of incentives,
Yeah.
and whether you've adapted that during this kind of COVID period,
Yeah.
given the sort of disruption and absence that might not otherwise have occurred.
Yeah, so for us, it's we do give certificates out on those points, but it's really difficult in a specialist setting if the child's never going to get, or if they've been off with COVID and they're never going to get to that 100%. So we award improved attendance. With attendance comes points. Those points have monetary value that the children can spend within school. And for some of them, it's just a shop where we've had things donated. We have started looking at experiences for our older children as well. So trips to the cinema, trips out to Yorkshire Wildlife Park, tickets for those, and asking sort of student voice. But it's done every half term in terms of our awards attendance, and that's delivered around school by one of the house mascots. So they go around delivering those attendance awards. And again, it's trying to develop that culture of we want children, I want our kids to be in school and enjoying school. School should be somewhere where they really enjoy, and that's what we hope we do as a school. And I know you will, on this, will all do that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I think we'll call it there for the set of questions, but thanks to everyone who's joined us this afternoon, and thanks for everyone who's submitted questions, and thank you again, Wayne, for giving us an overview, telling us about the culture and all of the interesting things that you do at Abbey School. It's been really, really useful, so thanks for that. And for anybody that's on Easter holidays, please enjoy the Easter holidays, and we'll obviously see you again after the Easter break, because we've got 3 more of these webinars coming up. So if you're interested, please sign up to those. And as you can see on the screen, and I've mentioned in multiple previous of these webinars, we have got a live attendance data trial, which is currently, or recently rather, being launched. The intention of which is to improve the flow of data between schools, local authorities and the department. So would encourage you to sign up to that trial so that the department can have a clearer picture on a more regular basis as to where the issues with attendance are, but more importantly, so that we can share that data back, particularly, in fact, with local authorities and trusts, but also potentially with individual schools. And there's a kind of medium-term goal there in thinking about whether or not we can streamline some of the attendance data collections too. So various incentives, I think, for people to sign up if you haven't already. So please do that. And thanks again for joining us, and thanks to Wayne for the presentation. So thank you.